Good morning, endurance, or actually, good afternoon, endurance friends. Matt Mosman from EndurElite coming at you with our third live Facebook broadcast. We're going to wait a few minutes for you people to join, and then we'll get right to it today. Just got done with an awesome run here in Spearfish, South Dakota. Trying to get in a few quality days before the snow flies again. We're supposed to get like 8 to 12 inches of snow over the next couple days, and it's going to be just miserable. Adam Fisher, hello. Shirley, hello. Mark, Drew, my friend, good to see you here. Don, hello. Christy, how you doing? Got a pretty good group, so I'm really excited about this this live broadcast today. We got some really good questions from the EndurElite Facebook group that got me really thinking. Hopefully, it can be some good value to you. So the three questions we're going to answer today are the three questions that were posed. The first one was by a guy named Victor. He's like, what's a good nutrition strategy the week leading up to more of an ultra type event like a Spartan Ultra or OCR race? And then a guy named Tukey asked about effective recovery methods. And then a guy, Michael Mark, asked if training in a carb-depleted state could help spare carbs and glucose during races. So we'll cover some of that today, and then I'll kind of open it up for Q&A, whatever you guys want to ask about training, nutrition, supplementation. I'm all fair game for it. If you want to shoot questions at me while I'm talking about this stuff, feel free to too, and I'll try to answer them the best that I can. So let's go to the first question. What is a good nutrition strategy leading up to a race? So you're a week out and you're getting ready to do, for the sake of this discussion, let's just say any race, because it's really not going to matter if you're getting ready for a 5K, a mountain bike race, an OCR Spartan race, or anything like that. The two main things you want to do the week leading up to race day is, one, saturate your muscle glycogen stores. So muscle glycogen is basically the stored form of glucose that provides energy during exercise, especially as exercise intensity gets really high. Now, a normal on-fit individual can store about 300 to 400 grams of glycogen in the liver and muscle. But as an endurance athlete or a trained endurance athlete, that amount can go up to about 1,000 grams, which is a significant difference. And basically, the more you have, the more energy you're going to have, especially as intensities get really, really high. So in the past, you've probably been told, you need to carb load the week before the race. And while you can still do that, there's a couple other ways to do this. So as an endurance athlete, you should be eating about 6 to 10 grams of carbs per kilogram body weight daily. If you do that, you'll probably go into race day having muscle glycogen stores fully saturated. But if you want to totally just skip that whole thing and just slam carbs the week before, what you can do, and there's a lot of research that supports this, is about 36 hours before you big race, on those days, you want to up your carb intake to about 8 to 12 grams per kilogram body weight. And the research has shown that will fully saturate muscle glycogen stores. So that's how you do that. And like I said, there's no need to do it a week out if you don't want to, unless you really like that. On the same token, too, if you're eating 8 to 10 grams of carbs per kilogram body weight daily, just day in and day out, again, you're probably going to go into the race with muscle glycogen stores fully saturated. So that's kind of the week up, but let's also discuss what you're going to do the morning of the race. So those glycogen stores are kind of topped off. I know this is hard for some of you to eat before a race, but if you could really learn to train your gut, it's going to make a heck of a big difference. So day of race, with carbohydrate consumption, you want to get in about 200 to 300 grams about 3 to 4 hours before you race if you can. And this may involve waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, which totally sucks, but it can make a big difference. I mean, there's actually research out there that shows that, not eating before a race, especially a longer duration ones, can have significant consequences later on in terms of performance. So shoot for 300 grams of carbohydrates about 3 to 4 hours before the race. And then if you kind of want to top them off, even more than that, you can slam another 50 to 75 grams of carbs about an hour before the race. So that's kind of the nutrition aspect. Let's talk about hydration. I mean, hydration, you really don't need to go crazy. And I know a lot of people will drink like electrolyte drinks leading up to the race, but unfortunately, that's not going to make a lot of difference. I mean, If you like it and it makes you feel good, absolutely do it. But I wouldn't go crazy on hydration leading up to the week of the race. But race day, you want to come in a hydrated state. You would probably want to drink about 16 ounces of water or some kind of fluid. About 2 hours before the race, and then another 10 ounces an hour before the race. And this will ensure adequate hydration without having to go and make a pee stop every 10 minutes. So that's nutrition, hydration leading up to race day. Now, in conjunction with this, depending on the race, you may want to decrease your overall work volume or workouts throughout the week, depending if you're tapering for a big race. Or if it's just a run-through race, you really don't have to worry about that. But if you are tapering and it's a big race, you would probably want to cut work volume anywhere from 50 to 70%, because really anything you do leading up a week before the race is not going to make a difference in terms of the way you race, unless you're doing like a really intense workout a couple days before. Other than that, it's not really going to make a difference at all. So I should add in this little part too before I go on to answer the next question. All these guidelines I'm giving you are based on the research, and it would be super nice if it was a cookie cutter answer for all people. I know you guys probably have things that work really well for you, and I'm not one to argue with that. I hate it when people come tell me and be like, here's this new diet. You balance on one leg while swirling this hand around while eating the Big Mac and drink a Diet Dr. Pepper, and you're gonna run, faster than you ever have before. That's total bullshit. So again, all these are general guidelines, and you may not agree with me, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not one to tell you that the way you're doing it is wrong. Again, all this information is based on the research. So that's the first question answered. The second question that was asked, just to recap, was a guy by the name of Tuki Garcia, and he asked, what are some good recovery methods for after a race? And that's a very good question. I mean, we all hate dealing with soreness and whatnot the day after a race, but there's certain strategies you can incorporate that maybe minimize that soreness and hasten recovery a little bit better. So here's what you're going to do. Immediately after the race, you want to consume about 1 to 1.5 grams of carbs per kilogram body weight immediately, and then every 2 hours, 4 to 6 hours after that. Now, what that's going to do is basically resaturate those muscle glycogen stores. In conjunction with this, with that first dose of carbohydrates, I'd also take in about 20 to 25 grams of protein. And what this is going to do is going to stimulate a process called muscle protein synthesis. And this is just an overly fancy physiological term for the process that muscle repair and recovery goes through. Because what usually happens, or what a lot of people think, or scientists think, is recovery from race involves repairing small micro tears in the muscle, and what muscle protein synthesis does is does something called satellite cells to bind to these damaged muscle fibers and basically makes them good again. So that's what you do immediately after the race, and then throughout the day, again, I would keep on slamming those carbs, just maybe about 6 to 8 grams per kilogram body weight, and then at every meal, again, have about 20 to 25 grams of protein per meal to optimally promote muscle protein synthesis to kind of get that recovery kick-started. What else with recovery? Ice baths, definitely wouldn't recommend. Cryotherapy, I definitely wouldn't recommend. I know, again, a lot of you people like this out there, but from a scientific standpoint, the ice baths do absolutely nothing in terms of inflammation, unfortunately. In fact, I mean, there's a couple studies that show that it can inhibit muscle adaptations to exercise, which we don't want to do. So the ice baths, no good. From a supplement standpoint, the protein, the BCAAs, again, will help muscle repair and recovery. I know some people will take tart cherry or like a green tea extract. But again, I don't think, and I had this conversation with a gal named Katie the other day, and she was asking me about, the inflammation process after exercise. And if you really want to minimize that, and honestly, you really don't want to do that. You want the inflammation process to occur to create the muscle adaptations. There was a study about 3 years ago, it involved weightlifters, but it's the same thing. They had these guys do a bunch of different leg exercises and measured the inflammatory response. and they had them do an ice bath, and it showed that it actually inhibited muscle growth compared to the group that didn't do the ice bath. So any kind of supplement that says it decreases inflammation or anything like that, I would particularly avoid after endurance exercise. And again, mostly I think like tart cherry is one you guys are probably familiar with, and then green tea extract is probably one you're familiar with too. So that's what I would do for the recovery after a race: 1 to 1.5 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram body weight immediately after, and then every 2 hours, every 4 to 6 hours after that, paired with a protein, and then regular diet throughout the rest of the day. And then in terms of like workouts, I mean, you guys know best. I mean, your body's pretty amazing at letting you know when it's time to go again. So generally, like, I like to take off, well, not take off, but go 2 to 3 easy days before I hit another hard workout after a race. And which was pretty interesting, it kind of goes along with this, is somebody asked me about something called whoop strap the other day, and I guess this whoop strap measures heart rate, and it can tell you when you're recovered and when you should be training hard and all this other stuff. I don't necessarily buy into it at this point, just because it's measuring everything off your heart rate on the wrist, which by itself isn't that accurate. But the good news is that the whoop strap, I love that name, the whoop strap, actually did a huge clinical study on it in a bunch of college teams, and I contacted them the other day, and they're going to be crunching those numbers, and it'll be interesting to see what the study shows with the whoop strap. Okay, so far we've covered nutrition leading up to the race. We've covered recovery strategies. Now this next one's pretty interesting. A guy named Michael Mark asked me if training in a carb depleted state can help you spare basically muscle glucose or carbohydrates during a race, more specifically a 2 to 4 hour race. And the answer is not so straightforward on this. Like, if you were to do this, like train in the carb depleted state, like 5 days before a race, that's going to do absolutely nothing to help you spare more carbs. So I kind of liken this back to the idea of like a ketogenic diet, where your body relies more on fat as energy. So if you wanted to train in a carb depleted state, you'd probably have to do it for at least 21 to 30 days to get your body more fat adapted, so it learned to basically burn more fat as opposed to carbohydrates during endurance exercise. But even then, and a lot of people will disagree with me here, like those on a ketogenic diets or athletes on a ketogenic should not skip out on the carbs. I know that sounds totally insane, but if you think about it, like, especially like during an obstacle course race, you're doing a lot of activities that are explosive and high intensity in nature. And guess what that relies on? That relies on anaerobic glycolysis. And guess what anaerobic glycolysis can use as its only fuel source? Carbohydrates. So if you're going in like purely ketogenic and you're not carb loading the day before or during, you're going to fall flat on your ass when you're coming to like high intensity efforts. There's another strategy out there that's not quite ketogenic. It's called raising your metabolic efficiency, and this is where the point where your body switches from utilizing fat as fuel and kind of switch to carbs can be raised a little bit, not necessarily by going like totally ketogenic, but decreasing your carbs a little bit, increasing fats and protein, and you kind of see a shift at that intensity where the body goes from using fat at a lower intensity, and that goes up a little bit. So before, like, you can use fat up to about, I don't know, it just depends on the person, 60 to 70% of maximum heart rate, but you can see that amount raised when you go up to about 75% maximum heart rate when you become more metabolically efficient. But to throw a whole wrench in this thing, if you want to go ketogenic, that's fine. I have no issues with that, but I would do it in the off season, and like I said, take that 20 to 30 days to get fat adapted, because if you're doing that right before a race, the whole process just sucks going keto. It's not, you're going to be grumpy, you're going to be irritable, there's something called the keto flu that can happen too, but that's besides the point. Like, in general, I'm not a big fan for keto unless it's like for ultra distance applications where the intensity isn't really, really super high. But like I said, when you get into those efforts that are a lot more intense, or if you're doing a mixed bag of like lower intensity and switching to higher intensity, I just don't feel like it's the most beneficial way to go. So that is if your body can spare carbohydrates if you train in a carb depleted state. So the answer is yes and no, but yes only if you were to get, train in a depleted state approximately 20 to 30 days before the race, so you become adapted. So at this point, I am going to open it up to any questions you guys may have. If you don't have any, we can circle back around with nutrition during a race if you want to, since we've talked about kind of nutrition leading up to a big race and recovery after. We can talk about how you should fuel during a race if you like. So I'll give it a couple seconds here for some questions, and then if not, we'll cover that. And then if there's no questions after that, we're probably just going to call it a day. All right, no questions so far. So how do you want to fuel during a race? Okay, let's just put it like this. If you're racing underneath an hour, you really don't need any carbs at all. Your body has enough glycogen to get you through that event, regardless of the intensity, unless you were doing like a dead out sprint the whole way, which is physically impossible pretty much for an endurance event. So anything underneath an hour, don't bother with the carbs. You can do something like with the carb mouth rinse, which I did a really cool video on. Check that out at the EndurElite website if you want. And then maybe just like sips of water through the race, and that'll get you through. So under an hour, you don't need like a sports drink, you don't need a gel, you don't need a carb. You just go out and kick some ass and you get it done. Then as you start to go up to like the 1 to 2 hour mark, that's probably when you want to start to introduce carbs. And the research here shows that about 30 grams of carbs per hour is the sweet spot to help kind of spare muscle glycogen and keep blood glucose levels elevated. And you can get these carbs, however you want. You can do it as part of your hydration solution. You can do it as gummies. You can do it as blocks, or like the chew blocks, whatever, you can tolerate basically, and what you like. So then as you go up to like the 2 to 3 hour mark, then you probably want to go up to about 60 grams of carbs an hour. Again, this is just all to keep muscle glycogen stores, sparing them, and to keep blood glucose levels elevated. And again, the same strategy here. You can get it from liquids, you can get it from gummies, you can get it from stuff like that. What's kind of important to note here is up until about 60 grams, you can use like one carbohydrate source if you want to. So like a popular one is maltodextrin, which, I mean, it's fine, but it's not optimal. But that can probably get you up to 2 to 3 hours. But then once you get above 3 hours, you're probably going to want to up your carb intake just a little bit more. So anywhere from like 60 to 90 grams of carbs an hour during like ultra endurance types events, which is a shit ton of carbs. I mean, that's a lot. You really have to train your gut to learn how to use that amount of carbs. So at this point, you're doing the sports drinks, you're doing the gummies, you're doing the chews, you may even be doing whole food, whatever's easiest for you there. But here's what's really interesting. When you get above that 60 gram of carbs per hour mark, your body can only basically can only absorb so much of one certain carb source. So like maltodextrin, if you tried to do like 90 grams of maltodextrin, you would probably get some major GI distress or gut discomfort. And that's because the gut uses multiple transporters in the body to basically digest and absorb these carbs. There's a great blog on the EndurElite website about this, but the point being, when you get above that 60 grams of carbs an hour mark, you want to introduce a variety of different carbohydrate sources, like dextrose, sucrose. Cyclic dextrin is an awesome one. That will be in our SustainElite sports drink. And then some slower digesting carbs too, like a rice or sweet potato powder. So like I said, that amount of carb is a lot, and it's something you really need to train your gut for. But if you can do it, and especially during an ultra endurance event, it's going to make a huge difference. So that's kind of nutrition during the race. I'm going to open it up again for questions here. I'm going to wait about 15 to 20 seconds. If there are no questions, I'm gonna call it a day and get back to doing some other stuff. All right, looks like no questions. If you guys think of anything else after you get done watching this video or watching through it, always feel free to direct message me with any questions you may have about anything endurance, training, supplement, nutrition related. I'm always here to help out where I can. You're very welcome, Christy Blair. I hope you're doing well. So I'm going to sign off. And until next time, my endurance friends, stay fueled, stay focused, and stay fast.